Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We have lots to get into with this week's show, so what do you say we jump right in? And we are beginning the broadcast with something we haven't really talked about too much on the show. We have been getting lots of questions from producers about carbon credits, carbon markets, and how with that, farmers can add some extra dollars to their operation. Iowa State University economist Chad Hart says the idea of carbon markets or paying farmers for their conservation practices that keep carbon in the soil appears to be more economically sustainable now than in years past. He joined me to break down how carbon markets and ag work and discuss any financial implications.
Well, I had to go back to what is a carbon credit with this one. So if you think about it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a carbon market. And by carbon here, we're looking at carbon as it moves through the atmosphere. So I want you to think about everything that we do either captures carbon or releases carbon. And in the case of agriculture, we do a lot of both. The idea is as we grow crops, our crops basically pull in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so bringing that carbon from the air into the plant and into the soil. At the same time too, when we harvest those crops and utilize those crops, we release some of that carbon back up into the atmosphere. With a carbon market, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create financial incentives, if you will, to utilize less carbon or figure out ways to keep more carbon either in the soils or in the water or in some sort of steady state form so that it's not adding to the carbon in the atmosphere. Because the carbon adding in the atmosphere creates what they call the greenhouse gas effect. That leads to things like the heat domes we've been experiencing over the past year and a half. And so that's the idea. As a carbon market is, like I say, trying to create financial incentives for agricultural producers to capture more carbon or release less carbon.
And from what I understand, this is something that farmers and landowners are getting contacted about more and more frequently by various companies, right?
They definitely are, because what you're seeing now is, I'm going to argue, a broad-based effort here. There are a lot of companies, not just within agriculture, but especially outside of agriculture, that are worried about carbon. We're worried about how it's changing, changing the global atmosphere. And agriculture is seen as one of the, let's call it, most direct industries that you can work with to create a carbon market. Because as farmers, the idea is our farmers and ranchers have ways that they can basically modify their production practices to bring carbon either out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, or they can use those practices to release less carbon. So if you think about, like, for our crop producers out there, moving from conventional tillage to reduced tillage or no tillage actually is a carbon saving move. You could look at putting some land that, maybe marginal cropland into more permanent grasslands, and that saves carbon. For our livestock ranchers out there, they could look at rotational grazing, which actually saves carbon. So these are all techniques farmers can utilize to save carbon, create what we call those carbon credits, which could be traded to other companies.
And I know that this isn't the first time that carbon has been talked about with farmers. What would make it different this time around?
The biggest thing that makes it different from, say, 10, 12 years ago, I would argue, is the outside agricultural interest and the amount of money that's being put towards it. You have your big companies like Apple and Google, McDonald's, Walmart, all talking about the sustainability of their business practices. And they're looking for ways to establish how they're saving carbon. In fact, one of my favorite little notes on this is if you ever go out and just go to the Google website, look down at the bottom of the page, and you notice they have a statement there that I believe says carbon neutral since 2007. So you're seeing all sorts of companies that are interested in being able to promote or talk to consumers about how they've reduced their carbon footprint. And they're putting money where that, if you will, outreach is. They're willing to spend money to find industries that can help them create that carbon reducing environment. And ag, like I say, has definitely been a target because of the ability of agricultural practices to save carbon.
Do you have any dollar figures, dollar amounts, as to how a farmer might be impacted financially if they were to introduce carbon sequestration to their operation?
At this point, it's hard to put a dollar value to it because it goes back to this trading of these carbon permits and what their value could be. When we look at what's being proposed right now, and what you've got is, I'm not going to call it a true carbon market yet, but what you've got are a lot of transactions that individual companies are trying to make with farmers on these carbon credits. Most of that has solidified to around $15 to $20 per what they call carbon credit. And a carbon credit is supposed to represent the reduction of carbon loss of 1 ton of basically carbon dioxide. For most farmers that we talk about in the Midwest, when looking at the practices we could do, like moving from conservation to no-till, you're talking about that move probably saves 0.6 tons per acre. So you may be talking about a payment of $10 to $15 per acre to our farmers right now based upon what we're seeing in the market. But some of our longer term studies suggest, and what we're seeing within, like I say, these companies that are interested in carbon, is that that's likely a sort of low price to get things started, and that we could see these carbon prices build up over time as we develop the market, as we figure out new techniques in not only creating the carbon credits, but also, build the market structure around trading those credits.
So this is something, I guess at least right now, that wouldn't be the main component of a farming operation, but something more supplemental in terms of income.
Correct. I have described this as like it's the side gig for agriculture. You can think about those folks that, you have your normal job and then maybe you drive Uber or Lyft on the side, or, we're delivering for Eat Street or DoorDash. It's a way to create some side income in relation to your main job. And in this case, for our agricultural producers out there, no, our main job is still producing the crops and livestock that we do. And hey, if we can generate these carbon credits additionally to that, that adds a little bit of revenue on the side for the farm.
Any final things to consider or projections on where you think we might see this a year, 5 years from now?
Well, like I say, I think when you're looking here, we're just at the very beginnings of trying to create these markets. It's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to take some time for these things to develop. When you look at existing markets in carbon right now, probably the longest running one is one that the European Union has. And it's taken them roughly a decade to sort of get a structure fully around that to where you could say that market is behaving like a true market. So I think it's going to take us some time to build here. Until then, I tell farmers, the best thing I can tell you to do is do your research here. This is going to, require folks to do some homework. This is not like trading corn or soybeans or cattle and hogs, where you do have these standardized markets. Here, it's more of an individual negotiation. And so you've got to figure out who's the company you're working with, what practices are they willing to pay for, how much are they willing to pay. It requires a lot more homework on the part of the farmer to participate in carbon markets right now.
Might be one of those things, a good idea to speak with, I guess, an attorney in a case like this, or...
Yep. It's definitely something I think you want to talk to not only an attorney, but, talk to your family, talk to, trusted advisors. For some folks, I can think of it as, we've had these movements of like wind turbines throughout the upper Midwest. We're seeing some movement on solar panels. We've seen some trading in, for example, in mineral rights on the farm. I want you to think of carbon right now sort of in that space where, yeah, you want to sit down and talk with your trusted advisors, because if you get in these markets right now, you are signing a contract. It is legally binding. And in order to create these carbon credits, what you're basically doing is you're agreeing to change some of the practices on your farm. So you're giving up a little bit of control in order to capture a little bit of payment. And you want to make sure you understand exactly what that contract says.
Enjoyed that discussion with Chad. Next week, we'll be joined by Doug Simon of Trade-Os. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Next up, it's hard enough to find a needle in a haystack, but what about a beetle? Blister beetles have the potential to cause injury to horses if ingested with harvested forage. We spoke with Nebraska Extension Entomology educator Dave Boxler to find out more about this potentially harmful pest.
Well, blister beetles vary in size and shape, but can be recognized by their long, narrow bodies, broad heads, and antennae that are about a third of the length of their body. They range from 9/16 of an inch to about 1.25 inches in length. Blister beetles can be found in alfalfa and other crops used for forage. Blister beetles will feed on plant foliage and occasionally cause some insignificant damage to soybean fields. The bodies of the blister beetles contain a chemical called cantharidin, which is a terpenoid that can cause blisters on skin tissue upon contact. Horses are very susceptible to this particular chemical. All or part of the horse's digestive system can be severely irritated, leading to infections and bleeding. The minimum estimated lethal dose of cantharidin is 1 milligram per 2.2 pounds of body weight. And especially here in Nebraska, the three-stripe blister beetle has the most cantharidin of the species that we have here in Nebraska. So the clinical signs of cantharidin poisoning may include blisters and ulcers in the mouth, gastritis, colic, diarrhea, and bloody feces. So if cantharidin poisoning is suspected, please contact your veterinarian as quickly as possible. A way to prevent or reduce the chances of getting cantharidin poisoning requires by the hay producer focused scouting and good management practices. Normally, blister beetles are commonly found on field borders unless there are population of flowering weeds in the fields. The flowering plants attract the beetles because they're going to be feeding on the pollen and nectar of those flowering plants. So scout your field 2 to 3 days before harvest. Also, it would be wise to harvest alfalfa or other hay before flowering of alfalfa. Cutting alfalfa before 5% bloom really reduces the risk of blister beetle contamination. And if sizable blister beetle populations are found, prolong harvest a couple of days and allow the beetles to leave the field. Some people would like to apply an insecticide to kill the beetles in the field at the time. However, research by Kansas State University as well as Colorado State University indicates that dead beetles will still contain a very active amount of cantharidin, and they can be incorporated into the hay upon harvest. And all it takes is about 4 to 6 grams of dried beetles to be fatal to a horse. Another method of reducing or preventing the chance of cantharidin poisoning is changing your harvesting methods. So you might think about using a sickle bar mower or a rotary mower and not crimping the beetles or crimping the hay. So that those are steps that you can use to avoid this particular problem.
If you need help identifying blister beetles in your field, you can send a pest sample to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic. We've got that information on the Market Journal website. Next up, the annual Husker Harvest Days event is just a few weeks away. Farmers across the state and surrounding areas always look forward to this multi-day event. It's been going on for over 40 years and gives producers a look at the latest equipment, supplies, and technology in farming today. The University of Nebraska always has a big presence, and this year, Nebraska Extension's theme is knowledge that helps cultivate opportunities. Extension's Ron Seymour says dozens of educators and specialists will be giving talks, answering questions, and continuing to strengthen Nebraska's ag industry.
We want to let people know about some of the new things that are being done research-wise, extension-wise, in agriculture that they can use in their operations and in their homes. So some of the topics are similar to what people have grown accustomed to. When they come in, they'll be greeted by the beef systems team. We're going to have the ag economics people going to be there talking about their Center for Agricultural Profitability. We're going to have some folks talking about on-farm research and precision agriculture, kind of together because they kind of go together, and that'll be real nice.
Husker Harvest Days will be September 14th, 15th, and 16th in Grand Island. So come on out, always a great time, and we have more info on the Market Journal website. Next up, irrigators in Nebraska are very sophisticated in their management of water resources and irrigation equipment, including center pivots. However, there's always room for new knowledge and a better understanding to conserve water and money and to provide a more uniform crop. End guns on center pivots are crucial to all of those cropping goals, so top-notch management of the end gun can boost uniformity and profitability of the irrigated crops. You can learn more about end gun management in the August issue of Nebraska Farmer. Moving on, and the University of Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory is the United States' officially designated tractor testing station. The lab is responsible for testing a representative tractor of each model sold in Nebraska, and it also tests tractors manufactured in other states and sold overseas. Market Journal recently got a closer look at the Tractor Test Lab to learn how it originated and how it operates.
So the Nebraska Tractor Test Law was created in 1919, and the first test was in 1920 of the Waterloo Boy. And since that time, in our first century of operation, we've tested over 2,200 tractors. The original test lab is now a museum and a historic landmark for ASABE. And in the museum, you can see a display of the story of how the test law came to be and some of our historic equipment. So in the late 1980s, Nebraska Tractor Test Lab joined OECD, and it's currently one of about 27 OECD official tractor testing stations around the world, and the only one in the Western Hemisphere. And being part of the OECD, much of the tractor testing is identical to the procedures original to Nebraska Tractor Test Lab, and that includes PTO testing, which we do on our dynamometers. So we have two dynos, 350 horse capacity for smaller machines, and a recently refurbished dynamometer to increase capacity to 1,200 horsepower. The test law requires that each tractor sold in the state of Nebraska for commercial purposes has a representative model of that tractor tested if it's over 100 horsepower. If it's less than 100 horsepower, the testing is optional, but there's an incentive to do so in that customers for commercial ag will get a tax incentive if the tractor has been tested. So at our PTO dynamometer, we'll run 8 to 10 hours of PTO tests at various loads and speeds, running 1 hour at rated engine speed, maximum power, and standard PTO speed. We do a lug run to find peak power and peak torque. We measure diesel exhaust fluid consumption during regen events if the tractor is equipped with a DPF. And we also operate the tractor in economy PTO mode if the tractor is equipped with a shiftable PTO. So in addition to PTO testing, we do drawbar testing as part of our compulsory test. The required portion is with the tractor unballasted, and to load the tractor we use our test car, which is somewhat of a portable dynamometer. So the tractor is connected to the drawbar at the front, and where we measure drawbar pull. This load unit can handle about 200 horsepower by itself, And if a larger tractor is being tested, we'll attach load units to the back of this. And that's where our student workers are very helpful. In addition to helping with test setup and other activities, they operate load units during testing. So our test car has closed loop control, so where the test engineer operating it can control the test car to maintain a constant drawbar pull, a constant engine speed, or a constant ground speed. Tractors are tested in several gears to measure maximum power and maximum pull. All right, so when we have a tractor set up to be tested, it's connected to the front of our test car, and it just pulls the test car around the track with this hitch. The drawbar pull is measured with these load cells. They have 100,000 pound capacity. We have 2 of them. It's for redundancy to make sure they give us an accurate measurement. Our fuel system is under the hood, where we supply fuel to the tractor being tested, and we control the temperature and measure the fuel rate. So as we move around the tractor, we've got a data acquisition system in this box and connections for the speeds, pressures, and temperatures that we measure during the test. So we typically have one of our test engineers and a student in the cab. The test engineer is coordinating activities between the test car, the tractor being tested, and if there are any load units attached behind. And the student is generally running the data acquisition system inside the cab. So they'll start data acquisition at the straightaway on our test track, and they'll measure steady state performance data for 500 feet, and that data gets averaged together to record the performance for that particular load point. To measure wheel slip and actual ground speed, we have what we call a fifth wheel underneath the tractor, and it just rolls on the ground, and it's calibrated to measure actual travel speed or distance. So we can compare that to actual wheel speed on the tractor being tested and calculate wheel slip from that. So the load from our test car is provided through some dynamometers that are connected to the driveline. So as we pull the tractor around the track, the rear axles through drive shafts and a gearbox and a transmission are connected to the dynamometers that are part of the closed loop control, providing resistance to being pulled. And at the back, as just another hitch where we can connect our load units for high capacity tractors if we need additional load on the tractor.
Various test results are always coming out of the Tractor Test Lab and are summarized in a standard report. You can check those out on the Tractor Test Lab's website at tractortestlab.unl.edu. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, harvest will be here before we know it. What are you tracking this week?
Well, Troy, since we're not going to be doing a regular forecast this week, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to give us an update on what maybe CPC is thinking as we go through this fall. And the reason I bring this up is because last month they issued a La Niña alert once again for the development of this event as we go through the fall period. Last month it was basically 65% probability. That's been upped in the latest release that was issued last week to 70%. Now there are some stark differences between this year's La Niña event building and what we went through last year. So I want to give you a brief update and maybe some thoughts of what we might see as we go through this fall and the early winter period. The first thing I'll draw your attention to is last year we had a full-blown La Niña event as we got into the middle of September, and this basically built from the east to the west. Basically, this is just basically a matter of La Niña conditions indicating that you're below normal sea surface conditions along the equatorial region. Look at the Gulf of Alaska, very warm conditions, and we've seen just a slight cooling trend coming off of Southern California into the central equatorial Pacific. Now, as we go into this year, what we're basically looking at is the same type of setup, a little bit more intense warmth just to the south of the Gulf of Alaska, but look over into the eastern equatorial Pacific, well above normal sea surface temperatures. And this broke about as we got into the late portions of December. So really we got what we call, I call a bimodal type pattern. Cold in the central, warm in the east. And this is going to be the key issue. If this does turn exceptionally cold, then we're going to lose a lot of the convection and the tropical system activity just off of Mexico, and some of this does make it into the monsoon flow, which has been very aggressive this year. So we'll be watching to see whether the upwelling currents will return in the eastern equatorial Pacific to support an expansion of this below normal sea surface temperatures, which would be a true indication of La Niña-like conditions. Now, if we look underneath the surface, there is a cold pocket that is moving up. Generally, we see this cold pocket come up through the east, and this is coming up through the central and then moving up toward the surface. And I haven't really seen this in my career, so this is kind of unusual. And this basically overwhelmed this big warm pocket that extended all the way from west to east. So this may be temporary, or this may be a sign of things that are going to build as we go through this next few months and intensify as we go into 2022. Time will tell. One of the things that CPC did issue last month with the first La Niña forecast was their fall outlook for above normal temperatures, with the most of the heat in the southwestern United States. That's what we would expect during the fall period. Intense high pressure developing over the southwest, and below normal precipitation associated with much weaker risks as we move toward the north and the east. Now, one of the things we typically see during La Niña conditions is a warm and dry fall period. But with that eastern equatorial Pacific still warmer than normal, we have the ability to at least get some monsoon moisture continuing up into the Great Basins, and any troughs that are able to move into the Pacific Northwest would work on that monsoonal moisture and carry some of that over into the central and high plains regions. Now, the other thing to watch for is the Gulf of Alaska. The upper air low that typically sits in the Gulf of Alaska is at its weakest point during the summer, and it strengthens as we go through the fall period. So if that area starts to really churn up and get stronger with the cooler sea surface temperatures, we'll likely see much deeper troughs. Deeper troughs kicking in the western United States would allow for much more moisture than the central and northern plains that we've seen last year. So that'll be a thing we'll be looking for, and we'll look for an update as we go into next month to see if these conditions continue to persist.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we talk with Extension Educator Glennis McClure about calculating field operation costs and setting harvest rates. Plus, Trados's Doug Simon joins us for a check on the markets. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.